Imagine you are standing in a dry riverbed in the ancient Middle East.
Oh man, just picturing the heat.
Exactly. The heat is just stifling.
This, that.
You are terrified.
Which makes sense given what you're looking at.
Right. Because in front of you on the sand are the severed, bloody halves of a cow, a goat, and a ram.
Yeah, not exactly a pretty picture.
No, not at all. And the carcasses have been meticulously arranged to create this narrow pathway between them. The message here is not subtle.
Not in the slightest.
If you walk between those pieces of meat, you are essentially signing your own death warrant. Like, if you ever break the promise you're about to make, that happens to you.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like a scene from a fantasy horror novel or something.
It totally does.
But this is precisely how a legally binding contract was signed in the ancient world. And it is the exact backdrop for one of the most foundational, world-altering promises in human history.
Yes, and that is why we are going deep into the Abrahamic Covenant today.
It really is a stunning visual to start with. It perfectly sets the stakes for what we're going to talk about.
Because the stakes are incredibly high right
Yeah,
now.
absolutely. You know, when we look at global history, we usually focus on the massive empires, like Rome or Egypt or Babylon.
The heavy hitters.
Exactly. But what we are dissecting today is a narrative engine that outlasted all of them.
Which is just staggering when you think about it.
It is. And our mission for this deep dive is to completely strip away the centuries of assumptions. We want to peel back, the stained glass window version of this story.
Right, the Sunday school version where everything is tidy.
Yeah, exactly. We are not just going to recount the events of Genesis chapters 12 through 22. We are going to completely deconstruct them.
Because we really want to figure out how a localized agreement made with one incredibly vulnerable family served as the structural bridge for so much.
Right, a bridge moving humanity out of an ancient polytheistic Mesopotamian world, and basically laying the bedrock for a modern multi-ethnic faith system.
And to pull this off, we went through a massive stack of sources to build a shortcut for you, the listener, so you can walk away incredibly well-informed on this.
It's a lot of material to cover.
It is. I was reading through the encyclopedic overviews we pulled from Britannica, which really locked down the historical timelines for us.
Those were super helpful.
Yeah, and we've also woven in some fascinating archaeological debates drawn from Bible Odyssey and Time magazine, just to figure out what was actually in the dirt.
Because the archaeology is where things get really
I
complicated.
mean, totally. And then to map out the deep theological wiring, we are relying heavily on comprehensive analyses from Bible Gateway and the Gospel Coalition.
And the layers of context those sources provide are vital, because we really have to completely reframe the main character of this text.
We really do.
There is this overwhelming cultural tendency to view Abraham, or Abram as he is introduced, as a flawless, glowing superhero of faith.
Right, like a guy who just floated a few inches above the anxieties of the Bronze Age.
Exactly. But the anthropology of the text reveals a man navigating intense fear, agonizing delay, and profound uncertainty.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to understand the magnitude of what Abram is asked to do, we really have to understand the world he's being asked to leave.
Which was not a simple world.
No. We are dropping into the early 2nd millennium BCE. The narrative opens with Abram's father, Terah, and their family living in the city of Ur.
Right.
And looking at the Britannica research, Ur was not some sleepy little pastoral village.
Far from it. I mean, Ur was a massive, thriving Sumerian metropolis in southern Mesopotamia, which is, modern-day Iraq.
Oh,
Yeah, it was a major hub of civilization, commerce, and advanced architecture. We're talking about a city dominated by a massive ziggurat dedicated to the moon god, Nana.
Okay, so Abram is born into a highly developed, urban, polytheistic society.
Precisely. And from Ur, the family migrates northwest to Haran, which is another major ancient city sitting right on a vital trade and migration corridor.
So they're already a family on the move. But they are moving between known, established hubs of civilization.
Right. They're staying within the safety of the known world.
But the inciting incident of this entire global narrative hits when God calls Abram to leave Haran
Yeah.
and to go to a place called Shechem down in the land of Canaan.
Which is a massive shift.
It is, and the specific wording of this command brings up a Hebrew concept from our sources that completely blew my mind.
Oh, you're talking about muladet.
Yes, moladet.
That word is the absolute key to unlocking the economic and social terror of this request.
Break that down for us.
Sure. So it translates roughly to your kindred, your origin, or your father's house. In the ancient Near East, your moladet was your entire web of social, economic, and familial security.
It was everything.
It really was. It dictated your legal rights, your physical protection, and your access to resources.
Right, so think about your own safety net today. You have a bank account insured by a government. You have a passport that grants you a legal identity. You have emergency services you can call if things go wrong.
You have federal systems protecting your basic rights.
Exactly, regardless of what state or city you drive into. So when Abram is commanded to leave his moldet, he is essentially being told to shred his passport.
And enter his bank account?
Yes.
Yeah.
Block all his emergency contacts and just walk into the desert. We often picture Abraham as this lone backpacker setting off on a spiritual retreat to, find himself.
Right, the solo wanderer.
But this was a massive household moving through hostile territory. It's less like a solo road trip and more like relocating a vulnerable mid-sized company without a map
That's a perfect analogy.
into a region where you have zero legal standing.
The socioeconomic realities of the ancient Near East were incredibly harsh, which makes that company relocation analogy highly accurate.
It's terrifying.
It is. We're dealing with an era defined by pastoral mobility, severe inheritance anxieties, and just intense vulnerability.
Because Canaan wasn't a unified place, right?
No, Canaan was not a unified nation-state at all. It was this chaotic patchwork of local city-states, shifting clan movements, and regional warlords.
Wow.
If a famine hit, or if a local king simply decided he wanted your flocks, or even your life, you had absolutely no one to appeal to. You were an alien. You were entirely unprotected.
And the risk wasn't just physical or economic. The sources highlight that this was a massive religious disruption as well.
Oh, absolutely.
You mentioned the moon god and the religious matrix of Mesopotamia and Canaan was entirely pluralistic and hyper-localized.
Yeah, people relied heavily on household gods. They're often called teraphim.
Okay, teraphim.
These were small idols that represented ancestral spirits and local deities, and they were literally tied to the physical land. The prevailing belief was that gods had geographic jurisdictions.
So if you moved, you lost your god's protection.
Exactly. If you left a territory, you left the protection of that territory's god behind.
So when YHWH calls Abram, he is calling him out of this pluralistic system into an exclusive loyalty. Abram is being asked to trust a God who is not bound by dirt or geography, which, to a modern listener, an omnipresent God, is a standard theological concept.
We take it for granted.
We do. But in the Bronze Age, trusting a God who didn't have a specific home base was a radical, almost illogical concept.
It really was. To take it a step further, consider the honor-shame dynamics of this culture.
Yeah.
Leave the gods of your fathers to abandon the graves of your ancestors and pack up your entire household on the voice of a deity calling you to an unseen land.
In an honor-shame society, that is social suicide.
Total social suicide. Leaving your molded meant stripping away every single layer of prestige and protection you possessed. It was a voluntary entry into profound weakness.
And that vulnerability isn't just a decorative background detail. It is the absolute core of the plot.
Everything revolves around it.
The entire narrative is driven by food scarcity, infertility, foreign residence, and the constant suffocating fear of local rulers.
Which logically leads us to the next massive shift in the text.
Right. Because if you're going to take a risk of that magnitude, if you're going to liquidate your assets, sever your alliances, and march your mid-sized company into hostile territory, you need a guarantee.
You need a legally binding contract.
You need something that binds the promiser to the promise. And that brings us directly to Genesis 15, which is really the anchor point of our deep dive.
It is the crucial moment.
Up until this chapter, God has made these broad promises to Abram. Land, becoming a great nation, and being a blessing.
But the years are passing.
Exactly. Abram is aging, he is childless, and he owns exactly 0 acres of this so-called promised land.
So he asks God for a sign. He essentially asks, how can I know that I will actually gain possession of this?
And that takes us right back to the visceral image we started with, the blood in the sand.
Right. God commands Abram to bring a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a young pigeon.
And Abram cuts the larger animals perfectly in half.
Yes, and arranges the halves opposite each other, creating that bloody pathway we talked about. You know, the Hebrew word for covenant is beret.
Beret, okay.
And in the ancient Near East, you didn't just make a covenant. The literal translation is that you cut a covenant.
Which is so literal here. I was trying to wrap my head around this ritual because it feels so alien, so dark, compared to how we think about religious promises today.
It's very graphic.
But for Abram, this wasn't strange at all, was it? This was standard legal practice.
No, not strange at all for him.
Our sources call it a self-maledictory oath. So breaking down that word, it literally means calling a curse down on yourself.
Yes, it's the ultimate terrifying ancient version of cross my heart and hope to die.
Exactly.
That is the exact psychological mechanism at play. In a standard ancient Near Eastern treaty, often called a suzerain vassal treaty, which was made between a greater king and a lesser king,
Okay.
the lesser party, the vassal, would be forced to walk between the severed pieces of the animals. They were acting out a severe penalty clause.
Making a threat to themselves.
Exactly. The vassal was declaring, if I fail to uphold my end of this treaty, if I fail to pay tribute or rebel, may I be torn apart just like these animals. It was a pledge of loyalty unto death.
But the narrative in Genesis 15 completely subverts the expectations of that ancient legal framework, right?
Completely.
Abram falls into this deep, terrifying sleep, and then a smoking fire pot and a blazing torch appear.
Which are established biblical symbols for the divine presence.
Right. And the text says the fire pot and the torch pass between the pieces. But here is the detail that changes everything. Only the divine symbols pass through.
Yes.
Abram does not walk the path of blood.
The theological weight of that subversion is staggering.
It really is.
The sovereign creator, YHWH, takes on the posture of the vassal. God is unilaterally binding himself to the promise.
He's the one taking the risk.
He is acting out the penalty clause, effectively saying, may I be torn apart if I fail to keep my word to you. He absorbs the entirety of the curse and the liability.
Think about what this means for the concept of earning your way. I keep going back to modern contract negotiations.
Yeah, how so?
It's like a negotiation where the CEO of a multinational corporation signs a billion-dollar penalty clause taking on all the legal liability.
Right.
And the entry-level employee just gets handed a stack of stock options without having to sign a single guarantee of their own performance. The liability is completely asymmetric.
The asymmetry is the point. The covenant is anchored entirely in God's unilateral commitment, not Abram's ability to perform.
Which is a huge relief for Abram, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And this leads us to what our Bible gateway sources identify as the theological epicenter of the text.
Oh, Genesis 15, verse 6.
Yes. It states, Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness.
Okay, we need to slow down and really define our terms here, because words like believed and righteousness have a lot of modern baggage.
They definitely do.
What did those words mean in a Bronze Age, ancient Near Eastern context?
Well, the Hebrew word for believed is hymenumen. It doesn't mean mere intellectual agreement, like believing 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah.
It implies a deep responsive trust. It means leaning your entire weight upon something. And the word for righteousness is tzedakah.
Tzedakah.
Right. In the ancient legal context, righteousness wasn't about flawless moral perfection or, never making a mistake. It meant being in a right relationship. It meant having a right standing within a covenant or a court of law.
So this verse establishes a mind-bending precedent.
It really does.
Abram's right standing, his tzedakah, was achieved not by his actions, not by his morality, and definitely not by keeping religious laws.
No, because the law of Moses with the 10 Commandments and the purity codes wouldn't be introduced for another 400 years.
Wow, right. He is credited with a perfect legal standing simply because he trusted the promise. It is the birth of justification by faith written right there in the dirt and blood of Genesis 15.
It fundamentally rewrites the rules of engagement between humanity and the divine. The covenant outlines 3 main axes: land, seed, which is the Hebrew word zerah, meaning offspring, and blessing, the word barak.
Land, seed, and blessing.
Yes. God promises the territory, he promises the heir, and he promises that through Abram's family, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. It is an ironclad, unilateral guarantee.
But, theory always has to survive reality.
That is very true.
It's one thing to have a beautiful theological guarantee. It's another to wake up 10 years later, look at your aging spouse, and realize you still don't have a child.
The biological window is slamming shut.
Exactly. And this transitions us from the majestic heights of the covenant ritual down into the very messy, very human reality of waiting.
The waiting is the hardest part.
It is. Like, if you're waiting for an important package and it's a day late, you're refreshing the tracking number every 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, constantly.
So if you're waiting for a promised heir in the Bronze Age and decades pass, you get desperate.
And the sociology of the ancient Near East amplified that desperation intensely. Well, barrenness was not just a profound personal grief for Sarai. It was an existential threat to the entire household. Without an heir, the molded dies.
Going back to the molded.
Yes. The family name is erased from history, and the assets are scattered.
So they decide to help God out. They look at the ticking clock and decide they need a human shortcut.
Which brings us to Genesis 16.
Right. We see Sarai approaching Abram with a plan. She offers her Egyptian servant, Hagar, to Abram as a surrogate to build a family through her.
Yes.
Now, to a modern listener, this sounds scandalous, coercive, and just cruel. But I was looking at the notes we pulled on the Nutsi tablets.
Ah, the Nutsi tablets. Such an important discovery.
Yeah. And it completely reframes how we read Sarai's actions. It looks like she wasn't just inventing a malicious scheme out of thin air, but using an actual legal framework from that era.
Exactly. The discovery of the Nutsi tablets was a watershed moment for biblical archaeology.
Tell us more about them.
These are thousands of legal and social texts excavated from the ancient city of Nutsi near the Tigris River. They date to the mid-2nd millennium BCE.
So right around this time.
Right. And while scholars caution against mapping them one-to-one with Genesis, they provide invaluable cultural context.
What do they tell us about surrogacy?
The tablets demonstrate that if a wife was barren, it was a recognized, legally binding custom for her to provide a servant as a surrogate to produce an heir for the husband.
So Sarai was being intensely pragmatic. She was utilizing a culturally accepted legal loophole to secure the household's future.
She was operating entirely within the bounds of ancient property and family law.
Wow.
But, pragmatism doesn't prevent tragedy.
Definitely not.
Abram agrees, Hagar conceives, and almost instantly the social fabric of the household is torn apart by jealousy and resentment.
Because human emotions don't care about legal loopholes.
Exactly. Hagar begins to despise Sarai, Sarai treats Hagar harshly, and Hagar eventually flees into the brutal wilderness.
And this forces us to push back fiercely on the traditional hero narrative we so often hear. Abraham and Sarah are not heroes here.
No, they were deeply flawed humans.
In fact, their lives often read like a cautionary tale about taking matters into our own hands. They have this massive promise, but the delay is agonizing.
Right.
It's like hitting refresh on a loading screen over and over and accidentally buying 3 of the exact same item because you couldn't just wait for the system to process.
That's a great way to put it.
They tried to manufacture the promise through their own fleshly expedience, and the collateral damage was immense.
And the collateral damage falls directly on Hagar. This is where the Gospel Coalition sources draw our attention to a profound theological pivot in the text.
What's the pivot?
Hagar is undeniably a victim of this household conflict. She is an enslaved woman, stripped of her agency, used as a biological tool to fix her master's problem, and then driven out when she becomes a source of tension.
It's a horrible situation.
It is, yet it is out there in the wilderness at her absolute lowest point that she has a divine encounter.
Right. She becomes the first person in the entire biblical text to give God a name.
Yes, she calls him El Roi, which translates to the God who sees me.
It is such a stunning elevation of a marginalized character. The angel of the Lord finds her, comforts her, and tells her to return, but also makes a promise regarding the child she is carrying, Ishmael.
Right. The narrative is very clear that Ishmael is not the child of the covenant promise, that specific lineage must come through Sarah, but God still blesses Ishmael.
He doesn't just abandon them.
Exactly. He promises to make him into a great nation as well. The text proves that God's care extends to the outcast, to the people discarded along the way by human manipulation.
But this entire messy detour creates a major crisis of identity.
Oh, big time.
Abraham and Sarah tried to force the outcome, and it resulted in a fractured family. The boundaries of the covenant have become blurred.
So God has to step back in.
Yes, he has to draw a hard line, essentially saying, we need to reestablish what this agreement actually is and who belongs to it.
The chaos of human shortcuts requires a physical marker to remind them of their true identity.
And we find that clarification in Genesis 17, right?
We do. 13 years have passed since the birth of Ishmael. Abram is now 99 years old.
Wow, 99.
Yeah. God appears and reaffirms the covenant, but introduces new dimensions of administration.
Okay, what changes?
First, there is the changing of names. Abram, meaning exalted father, is changed to Abraham, father of a multitude.
And Sarai too.
Right, Sarai, meaning my princess, becomes Sarah, simply princess, denoting a broader, more royal destiny.
Let's pause on the names for a second. Why was renaming such a significant mechanism in the ancient world? It wasn't just a rebrand, right?
No, not at all. In the ancient Near East, the act of naming or renaming someone was an assertion of authority and ownership.
Oh, interesting.
When a conquering king took over a vassal state, he would often rename the local ruler. So by renaming Abraham and Sarah, God is claiming absolute sovereign ownership over their identities and their destinies. He is reshaping reality with a word.
And along with the new names comes a new physical requirement. The Hebrew word is ut, meaning a sign or a mark.
Yes, the rite of circumcision.
God institutes this rite. Every male in Abraham's household is to be circumcised as an everlasting covenant in their flesh.
Which brings up a big debate.
It does. Because I know there's a major debate about how to synthesize this chapter with what we read earlier.
Right, the timeline is tricky for some people.
If Abram was already justified by faith in Genesis 15 without doing anything, why is God suddenly demanding a physical bodily ritual in Genesis 17?
The distinction between the two chapters is vital for understanding biblical theology. Genesis 15 is the ratification of the promise.
Okay, ratification.
It's entirely about God's action. God walks through the bloody pieces, God makes the guarantee. Justification is secured by faith.
Right.
Genesis 17, however, is about the administration of the covenant community. It is the human response to the promise.
So it's not about earning salvation.
Exactly. Circumcision does not save Abraham. His righteous standing was already credited to him decades earlier. Circumcision is the outward, physical badge of belonging to the community that holds the promise.
What I found staggering in the sources regarding this administration is the sheer scope of who gets included.
Yes, the inclusivity is incredible.
The sign wasn't just reserved for Abraham and his biological son. God explicitly commands that it be applied to the entire household.
Everyone.
That included servants born in the house and even individuals acquired with money from foreigners.
That detail shatters a lot of modern assumptions.
It really does.
We often project this idea of strict, exclusive ethno-nationalism backward onto ancient Israel. We assume it was a closed biological club.
Right.
But right here at the inception, the covenant household model is radically inclusive.
It incorporates the foreigner, the servant, the outsider into the core identity of the family. The covenant is outward-facing from the very start.
This is a beautiful theme.
Now, to be clear, the promise line, the specific lineage through which the ultimate blessing will come, is highly exclusive.
Yes, God reiterates that the promise will flow specifically through Isaac.
Right, the miraculous child of grace, not through Ishmael, the child of natural human effort. But the scope of the community that gets to participate in the household is wide open.
The emphasis is entirely on grace over nature. It relies on God's power over biological impossibility.
And that impossibility is finally overcome in Genesis 21. Sarah, at 90 years old, miraculously gives birth to Isaac.
Finally.
The bitter laughter of disbelief she experienced when she first heard the promise is transformed into the laughter of immense joy. The heir has arrived. The decades of agonizing delay are finally over.
You would think that's the end of the script.
Right. Roll the credits, play the happy music. They have the child. The covenant is biologically secure. They can finally exhale.
But the narrative refuses to let them, or us, relax.
Not at all. Because the ultimate resolution of this story requires an ultimate, almost unimaginable test. The emotional peak of this saga doesn't happen when Isaac is born.
No, it happens years later.
In Genesis 22, on a mountain called Moriah.
The binding of Isaac. It is universally recognized as one of the most difficult, psychologically heavy texts in ancient literature.
It is devastating.
God issues a chilling command. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you.
I want you, the listener, to put yourself in Abraham's sandals for just a moment. Imagine enduring decades of public ridicule, waiting, failing, trying to manufacture a solution, failing again.
Just decades of exhaustion.
And then finally holding the one thing you waited a lifetime for, the literal, breathing embodiment of everything God promised you.
His son.
And then the God who miraculously gave him to you asks you to take a knife and destroy the promise with your own hands. The psychological whiplash is devastating.
It is completely crushing. But we must read this text within its specific ancient context.
Okay, how so?
This is not a story of a deity acting out of arbitrary cruelty. It is a climactic, structural test of faith.
A test.
Yes. The central question of Genesis 22 is this. Has Abraham finally learned to trust the promiser more than the promise? Is his ultimate loyalty attached to the gift or to the giver?
We also have to address how this text interacts with the surrounding cultures.
That's a crucial point.
Because looking at the historical record, child sacrifice wasn't an abstract concept in the Bronze Age. In Canaanite cultures, it was a common, horrific reality used to appease local deities.
Yes, it was widespread.
How does the biblical text separate Abraham's actions from what his neighbors were doing?
Well, in the surrounding Canaanite and Phoenician religions, child sacrifice was essentially a mechanism of transaction and manipulation.
Transactional.
Exactly. You sacrificed your firstborn to force the gods to grant you something, usually rain, fertility for your crops, or victory in battle. You paid a horrific price to get a material return.
Ah, I see.
But Genesis 22 operates on a completely inverted framework. Abraham isn't trying to pry a blessing out of God's hands. He is demonstrating absolute surrender. He already has the ultimate blessing in Isaac.
Furthermore, the narrative is structured to definitively reject the Canaanite practice, right?
Yes.
Because just as Abraham binds Isaac, just as he raises the knife, the angel of the Lord intervenes. The command is halted.
It's stopped at the very last second.
And God provides a ram caught by its horns in a thicket to take Isaac's place on the altar.
It introduces the substitutionary motif, which becomes a beating heart of biblical theology.
God demands the sacrifice, but God himself provides the substitute.
Exactly. And because Abraham demonstrated that he would not withhold his son, the divine oath from Genesis 15 is reissued with maximum intensity.
The ultimate confirmation.
God swears by himself, because there is no higher authority in the cosmos to swear by, that he will multiply Abraham's offspring like the stars, and that through his seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed.
The narrative arc is breathtaking. From the terrifying vulnerability of leaving Ur, navigating the messy middle of human failure and surrogate mothers, to the ultimate surrender on Mount Moriah.
It's an epic journey.
It is. But when we step back from the emotional weight of the story, we have to put on our historian hats.
Time to dig into the dirt.
Exactly. We have to ask the critical questions. When we look at this climax on Mount Moriah, the details are so visceral and specific, it forces the question, is this just an incredible piece of ancient theological fiction? Or did a man named Abraham actually walk up a mountain in the Bronze Age?
That's the big question.
What does the archaeological and scholarly record actually say about these texts?
That is where we encounter a massive, multi-layered scholarly debate. When we examine the composition and historicity of Genesis, our Britannica sources map out the two primary lenses through which scholars read the text.
Okay, what are the two lenses?
On one side, dominating critical scholarship is the documentary hypothesis.
Let's break down the documentary hypothesis for the listener.
Please do.
Imagine you find an old, leather-bound family diary in an attic. As you read it, you notice something strange.
Like what?
Well, in some chapters, the author calls their mother Mom. The handwriting is loopy, and the focus is all on family feelings.
Okay.
But in other chapters, the author calls her Mother. The handwriting is blocky and precise, and the focus is entirely on rules and schedules.
Right. Distinct styles.
You would logically conclude that this diary wasn't written by one person in one sitting, but was compiled from different authors over time.
That is exactly the methodology behind the documentary hypothesis.
Ah, so it applies to the biblical text.
Yes. Scholars notice that the book of Genesis uses different names for God, sometimes YHWH, sometimes Elohim. They noticed shifts in vocabulary and thematic focus.
Which led to a theory.
Yes. This led to the theory that Genesis is a compilation of later literary strata. These are commonly referred to as the Yahwist, Elohist, and priestly sources, or J, E, and P.
And when do they think this was written?
Proponents of this view suggest these sources were written much later in Israel's history, during the monarchy, the Babylonian exile, or the post-exilic period.
So they were basically projecting backward.
Exactly. They were retrojecting their current theological and political realities backward onto a mythical founding father.
But on the other side of the debate, you have the traditional or evangelical view.
Right.
This view acknowledges that while there was likely some editorial updating of the text over the centuries, the core narratives preserve substantial, historically grounded patriarchal traditions that were handed down and codified by Moses.
And for our deep dive, we're presenting both of these frameworks impartially.
Right, because these are the vital lenses through which the modern world wrestles with the text. We aren't here to pick a side.
Exactly. But beyond literary theory, what happens when we actually start digging in the dirt?
Archaeology is where the conversation gets incredibly nuanced. As our sources from Time and Bible Odyssey point out, the archaeological record provides both striking hits and challenging misses.
Let's start with the hits.
We've already discussed some of them. Ur and Haran are confirmed as major hubs that fit the exact migration patterns of the text.
And Shechem has a verifiable continuity of Bronze Age occupation.
But one of the most significant discoveries, alongside the Nuzi tablets we mentioned, was the Mari archives.
Oh, the Mari archives are fascinating.
I was reading about these thousands of cuneiform tablets discovered in Syria.
Yes, dating to the early 2nd millennium BCE, right around the time the patriarchs would have lived.
And what do they show us?
The Mari archives brilliantly illuminate the social patterns of the era. They detail the movements of semi-nomadic pastoralists, the intricate diplomacy between tribes and city-states, and most importantly, the specific culture of treaty-making and oath-taking.
So it perfectly mirrors the world described in Genesis 15.
It matches the context flawlessly.
But the dirt also brings challenges. Our source from Time magazine zeroes in on what scholars call the anachronism of the camels.
Ah, the camels.
Yeah, the patriarchal narratives frequently mention camels as part of Abraham's wealth and transport.
And this is a major point of contention.
Why is that?
The current archaeological consensus suggests that the widespread domestication of camels in the eastern Mediterranean region didn't occur until the late 2nd or early 1st millennium BCE.
Which is centuries after Abraham.
Exactly. That is centuries after Abraham is purported to have lived. For some critical scholars, these camels are the smoking gun, proving that the stories were invented entirely in a later period.
By writers who just assumed camels had always been the primary beast of burden.
Right.
I think we can offer a helpful analogy for the listener here.
Go for it.
Imagine reading a brilliant historical novel set in the 1990s. The author describes the setting flawlessly. The screeching sound of dial-up internet, the grunge music on the radio, the blocky beige computer monitors.
Oh, the nostalgia.
Right. But in one brief scene, a character mentions checking their iPhone. Does one anachronistic detail mean the 1990s didn't exist?
Of course not.
Does it mean the entire story is fabricated? No. It simply means the story was stylized, edited, or passed down by someone living in a later era who accidentally projected a familiar piece of modern technology backward into the narrative.
That makes perfect sense.
An occasional camel doesn't destroy the core socio-legal truth of the setting.
And that highlights the true limits and powers of archaeology. Archaeology is a macroscopic tool. It can recover the environment of the ancient world.
It can show us how people lived.
Right. It can prove that the Nuzi tablets dictated surrogacy laws and that the Mari archives detailed blood covenants. But it cannot mechanically validate a single man's faith.
It can't prove a miracle.
Exactly. It cannot prove that a deity spoke to an individual sitting in a tent in Canaan. What the dirt does prove, definitively, is that Genesis is not a fairy tale set in a magical, ethereal realm.
It's grounded in reality.
It is firmly, accurately rooted in the recognizable kinship, land, and treaty features of the ancient Near East.
And the sheer impact of that text is undeniable, regardless of which scholarly lens you view it through.
Undeniable.
Which leads us to the final major movement of our exploration. How does this ancient family drama, dealing with barrenness and blood rituals in the Bronze Age, become a global theology?
To map that out, we have to look at the canonical context, how the Bible itself frames the story.
How does it frame it?
The Abrahamic Covenant acts as the grand hinge of the entire biblical narrative. If you look at the first 11 chapters of Genesis, it is a story of universal creation followed by escalating global brokenness.
Right, you have the fall in Eden.
You have the catastrophic flood, the scattering of humanity at the Tower of Babel. The world is fractured.
Completely broken.
But then, in Genesis 12, the camera radically zooms in. It narrows down from all the nations of the earth to one unknown man and his barren wife in Mesopotamia.
And the promise made to that one family becomes the narrative engine that drives everything else.
It drives everything.
It drives the exodus from Egypt, the formation of the nation of Israel, the establishment of David's monarchy, and the entire prophetic hope during the Babylonian exile.
The Old Testament is relentlessly focused on tracking those three pillars of the promise: the land, the seed, and the blessing.
But when we cross over into the New Testament, we see a profound and radical reframing of those pillars.
A huge shift.
The writers of the New Testament men, like the Apostle Paul, the author of Hebrews, and the Gospel writers, do not view Abraham merely as a neat piece of historical trivia or a good moral example.
No, they view him as central.
They view the Abrahamic Covenant as the definitive interpretive key to understanding Jesus of Nazareth and the entire mission of the early church.
Paul's theological maneuvering in his letters to the Romans and the Galatians is a masterclass in ancient textual interpretation.
He really digs in.
He builds his entire argument on his reading of Genesis 15. Paul forcefully points out that Abraham was declared righteous centuries before Moses ever came down the mountain with the Ten Commandments.
Oh, that's a huge point.
Therefore, Paul argues, justification by faith, being credited with a right standing simply by trusting God's promise, is the foundational bedrock reality of relationship with God.
It predates everything else.
It predates and supersedes following religious laws or maintaining ethnic boundary markers.
And Paul does something brilliant with the promise of the seed, the zera.
Yes, in Galatians chapter 3.
He makes this highly specific linguistic argument. He notes that the word seed can be plural, referring to many descendants.
Right.
But it can also be singular. Paul asserts that while the promise flowed to the nation of Israel, the ultimate singular focal point of that promise was always meant to be one specific descendant.
And for Paul, the ultimate seed of Abraham is Christ.
Exactly. By identifying Jesus as a fulfillment of the seed promise, Paul synthesizes the entire flow of redemptive history.
It brings it all together.
Because Jesus takes on the curse of the broken covenant, echoing the torn animals in Genesis 15, and rises again, the blessing that God promised would reach all nations is finally unlocked.
It goes global.
The New Testament writers argue that the inclusion of the Gentiles, non-Jewish people from every nation, tribe, and tongue is not some secondary backup plan.
No, it was the original intent of Genesis 12 all along.
Through faith in Christ, ethnicity, background, and moral perfection are no longer the boundary markers for belonging to God's family. Trusting the promise is.
It democratizes the blessing on a global scale, which brings us to the ultimate application.
Exactly. Why does an ancient Mesopotamian real estate and inheritance promise matter to you, the person listening to this right now?
It's a great question.
Think about the world you live in. We live in a culture that is utterly, exhaustingly obsessed with self-salvation.
We really do.
We spend our entire lives trying to secure our identity by what we achieve, what we earn, the network we build, or the control we can exert over our circumstances.
Always hustling.
We are constantly, frantically trying to walk through the cut pieces of the animals ourselves, trying to prove to the world and to ourselves that we are worthy of the good things in our lives.
And the Abrahamic Covenant is the ultimate disruptor to that exhausting mindset.
It changes the rules.
It declares that true lasting identity is received by promise, not by achievement. It is granted by grace. It cannot be manufactured by human leverage.
It completely upends normal power dynamics.
Yeah.
And if we extrapolate that into public life and how we interact with society, the implications are revolutionary.
They really are.
Covenant faith creates a people whose primary ultimate loyalties are ordered toward God rather than any human empire.
Right, because if your identity and your inheritance are guaranteed by a unilateral promise from the creator of the universe, you are no longer entirely susceptible to the fears, the manipulations, and the demands of the local warlord.
Or the regional politicians.
Or the cultural pressures of whatever modern Egypt or Babylon you find yourself living in. You fundamentally belong to a different kingdom.
It is an incredibly liberating way to view your place in the world. So let's wrap up this massive journey.
It's been a long road.
We have traveled all the way from the towering polytheistic ziggurats of Ur, walking alongside a vulnerable, mid-sized nomadic company.
We've navigated the terror of famines, the bitterness of family betrayals, the chaos of human shortcuts, and the joy of miraculous births.
We stood in the dirt and watched a terrified man cut animals in half while a smoking firepot took on the curse of a broken world.
We watched a father raise a knife on Mount Moriah, only to be stopped by the provision of a ram.
And we've tracked how that localized Bronze Age promise acted as the structural bridge to a global theology that redefines grace, faith, and what it means to be a blessing to the nations.
It is a sweeping, multi-millennial narrative. But as we close, there is one final concept from our sources, drawing specifically on the New Testament book of Hebrews, chapter 11, that we haven't deeply explored yet.
And it presents a profound, lingering paradox about Abraham's life.
Yes.
What is the paradox?
Well, Abraham was given an everlasting promise. God explicitly told him that the vast land of Canaan would belong to him and his offspring forever.
Right, he was promised the land.
Yet, if you read the text closely, from the day he arrived to the day he died, Abraham lived his entire life in tents.
He never built a palace.
He never established a capital city. He never wore a crown. In fact, the only piece of the promised land he ever legally owned, the only real estate he ever purchased with his own silver, was a tiny, dark burial plot.
Just a grave.
A cave in a field called Machpelah, where he buried his wife Sarah.
So he held the cosmic deed to the world, but he slept on the ground.
Precisely. The writer of Hebrews observes this and says that Abraham lived like a stranger in a foreign country, dwelling in tents because he was looking forward to a city with eternal foundations whose architect and builder is God.
That's amazing.
He trusted the promise so completely, so deeply, that he didn't feel the need to force the immediate realization of it in his own short lifetime. He was content to be a pilgrim.
That is such a haunting, beautiful image. And that brings us to the final provocative thought we want to leave you with today. Picture yourself sitting in that tent. What does it mean for you to live your life holding a massive, eternal promise? A promise of grace, of secure identity, and of ultimate restoration for the world. Yet having to remain a pilgrim who never fully sees the final result in your own lifetime.
That's a tough question.
We live in a world that aggressively demands instant gratification and tangible, immediate proof of success. But looking at the life of Abraham, true faith might just mean being comfortable in the tent, knowing the city is still coming.
Wow. That's a lot to mull over.
It is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring these sources, keep pushing back on the assumptions, and keep asking the big questions.